And let me share my screen. Okay, there you are.
Okay, thanks, Margaret.
Sure.
Well, I'd like to welcome you all for joining the CERT American Red Cross shelter training this afternoon. I know it's a beautiful day outside, so I even appreciate more that you're willing to be here on this call. So if we go to the next slide. I'm Brianna Taylor. I'm a volunteer with the American Red Cross. I actually started with the Red Cross during Hurricane Katrina. Before Hurricane Katrina, my family had been vacationing in Thailand in December of 2004. And if you remember what happened back then, we were there when the Indian Ocean tsunami hit. We couldn't get out of the country. We watched everything unfold. It was total chaos. And it was just really heartfelt and impacting to see what was happening. So we came home and I knew I wanted to go back and help. So about 6 weeks later, I called my brother, who's a construction worker in Chicago, and said, Bill, you want to go with me? So we got on a plane as what you would consider spontaneous volunteers and went back to Thailand and ended up on an island called Phi Phi Island. And we were there for 3 weeks doing recovery work. At some points, we were still digging debris. It was probably the very beginning of the grassroots of organized spontaneous volunteers. So when that finished, we came home, and it was a life-changing experience. But you get home and the day-to-day chores come back and you start to put things on the back burner. And then that following fall, Hurricane Katrina hit, the largest natural disaster that we'd had in our country. So like hundreds of other people, I showed up at the Red Cross office in Oakland saying, how could I help? And that was the beginning of my volunteering with Red Cross. I was deployed to Louisiana and had been deployed to many disasters since then. About the last 5 or 6 summers have been at every wildfire that we've had here in Northern California. I'm currently the regional disaster chair. I serve as the volunteer partner to our regional disaster officer, but Contra Costa is my home. And so I want to make sure that we're taken care of here in Contra Costa County. So I want to give a big, big thank you to Margaret, to Milagros, and to Trish Byrne, all of whom have really put this together. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with all of you and talk to you a little bit about Red Cross sheltering. So thank you very much. And both Margaret and Milagros will be helping and monitoring the chat for us today. So let me turn it over to you, Margaret, for a few moments to any housekeeping things that we need to go over.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody, for showing up today. We have quite a full house and a very jam-packed schedule. So for that reason, and based on the experience we had in the morning session, we really need people to put your questions in the chat. And we will, Brianna will answer your questions at the end of the session. If we run out of time, we will, and regardless, we will make sure that all questions are answered, and we will distribute it to all 3 CERT organizations so that you'll have your questions answered. We mentioned already that this session is being recorded, and that'll be made available to all of you, as will the morning session, so people can hear questions that or hear discussion that occurred in both sessions. It's really important to keep this moving, that you please mute yourself throughout this entire process unless asked to participate. There'll be a breakout session and we'll give you some instructions then. But certainly, please do try to put all of your questions in the chat, and that way they'll be recorded for posterity. We can make sure they're answered. So I think that's it, Brianna. I think that's it for housekeeping.
Okay, great. So our agenda today will look like, I'm going to start with a short, brief overview of the disasters that we've experienced in 2021. And then we'll talk a little bit about safety, working in a Red Cross shelter. This morning, we didn't get to that 10-minute break. The time went so quickly. And then we'll talk about temporary evacuation sites, which I don't believe were really included in the information that we gave you to look over. And then we'll talk about a Red Cross CERT partnership, which is really very exciting. And then we'll wrap up in a few key takeaways. And as Margaret said, the time just went so fast this morning, so there's a lot to go over. So why are we doing this? Well, if we look at all the things that have gone on during the last several years, we know that no organization can respond to the disasters that we've had alone. And the wonderful thing about working together with CERT is that CERT and Red Cross are like-minded people. We're both out there responding in the ways that we can and taking care of our community. And there are times when I think we can really support one another in even a more productive way than what we've been doing, and thus also better serve our communities. So this shelter training and the possibility of you, when you're done doing your search and rescue and the work the valuable work that you perform as CERT, if you still want to keep working, we would love to come and have you help us work in our shelters. We've known over the past years that as disasters get larger and larger and more of our volunteers are responding, that we don't always have enough volunteers here at home if something happens here at home. And it's also things like those apartment fires that sometimes we need help in running a shelter, taking care of the people that were affected that way too. So let's just take a look at 2021 very quickly to give you a broad perspective of what's been going on. In 2021, the US experienced 20 separate weather climate disasters, with losses each that exceeded $1 billion, putting 2021 in second place for the most disasters in a calendar year. And that, excuse me, was behind the record 22 separate billion-dollar disasters that happened in 2020. What really made 2021 stand out was the diversity of disasters. We were at all of these. And if you think about them, there was one winter storm cold wave event, which focused on the deep south in Texas. And if you remember Texas being without power for a long time during a cold wave, pipes bursting on boil water order. It was something that doesn't normally happen in Texas that way. We had one wildfire event, which combined the impacts of the wildfires across Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. One drought and heat wave event this summer and beginning of fall from Northern California, extending into Portland and Washington, where Portland reached a high temperature of 116 degrees. Life-threatening weather, deaths occurred because of it. 2 floods in California and Louisiana, 3 tornado outbreaks, including the devastating tornado outbreak in December in Kentucky, 4 tropical cyclones, Elsa, Fred, Ida, and Nicholas. We're still responding to Ida, and 8 severe weather events across parts of the country, including the Midwest December derecho. And we also had the wildfires in Colorado in December. So overall, these events resulted in deaths of 688 people, and they had significant economic effects on the area impacted. So what we've seen during the past couple of years is a shift from acute to chronic disasters. Acute being intense, they happen, they're over, to chronic meaning reoccurring, one wildfire after another wildfire, so that they go on for months and months. As climate disasters increase, the number of vulnerable people who are displaced and in need of Red Cross aid increases. So we need to evolve to meet this truly huge challenge. During the past year, Red Cross launched a new major relief effort every 12 days somewhere in the country, providing shelter, food, and care. And a family that was displaced in the US spent an average of nearly 30 days in a Red Cross supported emergency shelter. The extended stays were largely due to lack of savings and community housing shortages. Signs that climate-driven disasters are compounding the financial hardships of the pandemic. Since January of 2021, volunteers from our region deployed 552 times, dedicating almost 70,000 volunteer hours to assisting neighbors across the country during 41 different disaster relief operations of all sizes. And that included the wildfires here and in Oregon and Hurricane Ida. So we've been very busy. So if you move to the next one, Margaret. So this just gives you a little picture of the climate trends that we've been talking about. Okay, if you go to the next one. So Red Cross and CERT working together is nothing new. The picture on the left was an exercise we did many years ago, Red Cross and CERT together, opening up a shelter. And the picture on the right is a recent partnership with Concord CERT, where we last May did a Sound the Alarm event at an apartment complex in Concord of senior citizens who we went in and helped them understand what to do if a fire broke out in their home or apartment complex. CERT taught them how to use a fire extinguisher, and we talked about fire safety. So it was a great event, and once again, working together hand in hand, helping to make the community safer. The preparedness phase is incredibly important in disaster. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So to kick this off and get everybody started, we're going to do a breakout session. And what we'd like you to do in the session, I know in the material that we gave you to prepare for this, they talked about client first sheltering. So if in your group, you would talk about what is client first sheltering, why is it important, and list some of the ways that you can demonstrate client first sheltering when you're opening, operating, or closing a shelter. So when you get into your groups, if you choose a spokesperson who will report out, that would be great. And we'll give you about 10 minutes. So Margaret, you want to talk about getting them in the breakout session?
I do. So folks, magically, you're going to be put into a breakout room in a second here. You'll have 10 minutes. I'll send your breakout team a little warning to let you know that the time is coming close and you need to wrap up your discussions. And at the end, you will see a screen, a notice at the bottom of your screen. You can either leave the breakout room or you can leave our session entirely. When it's time to come out, hit the leave the room, not the leave the meeting completely. So I'm going to send you off into your rooms. Here we go. Just accept to join the rooms. And Brianna, there are 6 rooms. Hi.
Hi, Margaret. So would you recap the scenario again for us that we're going to?
Yes. So you just want to discuss why client first sheltering is important, what it is, why it's important, and what are ways to demonstrate it when you are opening, operating, or closing a shelter from the training that you went through on your own. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I see everybody's starting to come back now.
Yes, they are. Just muting folks who unmuted themselves during the breakout.
Yeah.
If folks can do that themselves, that'd be great.
Margaret, was the morning group this large as well?
Yeah, it was pretty
Excellent.
large.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'll send you guys the tallies. I mean, the names.
Excellent.
Okay, I think you've got everybody back, Brianna.
Okay, if you,
You want to see the slide while folks are
Sure.
talking? Okay. All right.
okay, so what we'll do now is we'll have each group report out on their key points, and what we'll do as
First.
have you talk about what is client first sheltering and why it's important and ways that you demonstrate it. And as each group goes, if you have more to add to what's already been said, please. So who would like to start off?
I can start.
Okay, good, Judy. Thank you.
Okay. Our group talked about the importance of the first impression when people first come to the shelter after a disaster. They're under a lot of stress, and we would need, as volunteers there, to be welcoming. We need to look professional. We need to have clear instructions. We need to be respectful, cordial, and understanding. We need to be organized and have signs so people know where things are. And of course, a clean and safe place. And the greeter's role is very important because that's the first person someone's going to see when they're coming from whatever kind of disaster they've experienced. We also need to pay attention to the individual needs of the people. We need to listen. We need to monitor them, look for physical or possibly mental issues with them. Some people are not going to want to come inside. Some people will have pets. Maybe some people will choose to stay in their cars. If they do, we need to know who we need to bring food to, or do we need portable bathrooms? We probably do. We talked a little bit about volunteers also needing support and rest and someone they can talk to. And then, of course, we touched on COVID and that we're doing this during a COVID time, so we need to be knowledgeable and careful about social distancing and spacing. Those were kind of the things we touched on.
Great, Judy. You guys touched on a lot, all very, very important. Yeah. Okay, let's have another group share their comments.
I would report for room 3. Many of the things that Judy spoke of, we did too, in terms of respect for the client and to ask them what is it that they need, so that we're sure to try and meet that need and not just assume what we think they need, and to listen to them, and it may be, they just need a shoulder to cry on, and we need to be sympathetic to that. But one question we had, and maybe Brianna can speak to this at some point, is yes, we need to be sympathetic and respectful, but we also need to be firm with them. There's shelter rules, for example, that need to be followed. And how do you balance that? Respectful, helpful, sympathetic, but firm in what the guidelines are for being in the shelter.
Brianna, I've put that question in the chat so we can capture it.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, we started out talking about, one of us brought up customer-oriented customer service, like in the quality concept. And then Tony came up with something better and said, guest, they're our guests. And I'm thinking of the old Hilton ad, be our guest, be our guest. I thought that was pretty good. I mean, if we really think about them being our guests, I think that's a great word. So we talked about that, having a feeling of human touch, the way that you talk, the way that you work, and that kind of fits into being a guest and, the customer side of things. And then, let them know about the plethora of services. Did I say that right, Tony?
Plethora.
A whole series of things that we have available for them to make them feel like, they have this secure shelter that they're moving to. And we talked about rules, just like my fellow did in the last presentation, but we have to be flexible. We have to have rules, we have to be flexible, and again, focused on the guest. We need signage, we need, all the appropriate things so they know what the rules are and where they're going and how things are controlled. But overall, I think the best thing that we came up with was guest. Be our guest.
Okay, and we still have, I believe, one more group.
Yeah, I think it might have been ours. I can't remember what number we were, but
You're it, Carol.
we talked about being aware and totally customer service, just like in any other like business. You're focusing on the customer. What are their needs? Being responsive to their needs, and really watching also, because also somebody had brought up the fact that, there's people that might need, well, everybody's going to need different things. Certain people might be used to other things in their life, and we need to really be aware of that and have, as everybody said, compassion. And what, we really didn't talk about rules and stuff like that. I guess didn't get to that, but yeah, that's so important. We talked about safety, and especially just the normal safety versus now we have COVID. We have to be very, very aware of that, and listening and watching was huge. Anybody else in our group want to add to that? I'm sure I missed a lot.
I missed something when I gave my presentation. I want to just add it on, and it's snacks.
Oh, snacks.
Got to have snacks and make them feel warm and fuzzy by providing snacks. Very important.
Yeah, hot chocolate and
Yeah. Oh,
marshmallows,
yeah.
whipped cream. Yeah.
Those snacks are still there. We may deliver them a little differently because of COVID,
Yeah.
but they're a very soothing and important part of putting the client first.
Yeah.
So, and showing them.
We also, there were people also in our group that were, had mentioned about maybe the people that were in the cars. Of course, they're with their pets. And I had mentioned that in Katrina, a lot of people did not leave their pets, and hence they passed away. And after that, and this is something else, but they created disaster animal response teams. So there is sheltering for pets as well, not necessarily with the American Red Cross. Now it's called CART, County Animal Response Team.
And we'll get to that, right, Brianna?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Sounds good.
Pets are a huge part. And Katrina changed the way we all did things.
Yes,
So things look very different now.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that we have a saying in Red Cross, it's about getting to yes. And getting to yes doesn't mean that they get what they want necessarily. And it doesn't mean that we deliver it. It means that we help them to get to that point. And it might be with a resource, with a partner. And it can look different for different people. That's why I put this little equality versus equity. Not everybody needs the exact same. And when we think about, in Red Cross, we talk about what we do for one, we have to do for all. And yes, that is true, but it's also delivered in a different way for some people because the needs are different. So it really is about how do we look at the individual needs of those people so that we can get them on a level playing field? And that isn't always the exact same way. So that's something to keep in mind. And getting to yes is also about needs versus wants, and what are the needs and what are the wants. And I used to say that to my kids as they were growing up. Is it something you need or is it something you want? They're different. Now, I don't say it that way to people in our shelter, but it's the same thing. And to understand that in the very beginning, when you're opening up a shelter, it is chaotic. And it's really about just getting their needs filled before you can start looking at wants. And I'll give you an example. It's like, it'd sure be nice to have a pillow on my cot. Yeah, it really would. But at this moment, what's important is that you have a cot, you have a blanket, 2 blankets. You can use one as a pillow right now. A safe place to stay and food to eat and information. So again, it's helping to get to yes. How can we get to yes? And thinking about, I had someone in the Red Cross say to me, and this is a little bit about rules also, that it's about the guardrails, and the rules are the guardrails. But within the guardrails, there's quite a bit of space in that street, but it's just that we need to stay within the guardrails, and they're there for a reason. But within those guardrails, we have a lot of flexibility. And then it's how do we use that to get to yes? So we'll talk more about that as we go forward. And, rules, something we're all used to living in. There's a stop sign, we stop. A red light, at least we're supposed to stop. We stop. And what that does is it makes for order. So order and safety, so that I go when I'm supposed to go. And when I go, it's safe for me to go. And so it's the same thing with the rules. And when things are so chaotic in somebody's life, they bring a sense of security. And when you have a large number of people together, it's really important that you have a way to keep them all safe. So I will say that, and we'll talk more about them as we go forward. Okay, any questions?
Did we get all the groups?
Am I missing? We did 5.
Okay.
Do we have 5 or 6?
I'm Larry, and I was in group 1, and I hadn't had my chance to speak yet.
Oh, good, Larry. We don't want to miss you.
Well, thank you for that. One item that we brought up was information. People come in, we greet them, make them feel at home as much as we can, and then one of their big needs will be information as to what the day is going to look like, what they're going to do in a shelter, and information should be delivered to the clients in a timely manner, especially whatever we can do is to provide information about how their family is doing, other members of their family, and information about referrals to community resources that they might need that particular day or as the days go on in the shelter. So community resources are also important, and how we can get the people, what the plans are to get people back into their living situations as soon as possible. So we brought up that information for the people coming into the shelter was a very important thing on a timely basis and on a daily basis as well. Encouragement, things are going to be okay, and all turns are optimistic. Every turn you make you should look for the optimistic side of it, and we try to encourage that to our clients as well. And give them encouragement and give them hope, and find out what their needs are now and try and meet those needs, and then ask them what their needs will be in 8 hours and try and plan ahead for their needs that are available in 8 hours. That was basically the things that over and above what was already presented by the other groups. It was more information and a prediction of what is about to, or what will be happening in the future for our clients.
Excellent, Larry. Thank you. Do you know what the most asked question is of people in a shelter?
Where's my family?
It's when can I go home?
Mm,
Yep. And so your comment about information is so critical to the anxiety that people are feeling, because they want to know when can they go home. And so bringing in that information, and as you said, in a timely manner, is so important. And yes, information about family is very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And let me just say something about encouragement. Encouragement is so important. I had to learn, I'm a very optimistic person, and I want to make things okay for people. But I had to learn that in a shelter, I can't make their life okay. I can't tell them that everything will be okay, because I don't know if that really is what will happen. But I can be with them, I can stand by them, I can support them, and I can give them the encouragement to go on. And with that comes hope. You know? And so it's a very fine line between saying something that you can't guarantee will happen and still being encouraging and hopeful. So I just want to bring that into people's conscious awareness, because that was a hard lesson for me to learn, because I want to say to people, it's going to be okay, but it might not be. So just keep that in mind. How can you convey that without saying those words?
And I was
So-
just going to say one other thing, this is Carol, that everybody's idea of okay is different.
That's right.
May or may not know, exactly. I mean, you're hopefully communicating with them, and it's going back and forth, but you just never know.
That's right. That's
Their
right.
idea of okay and our idea of okay, totally different could be.
Yeah. And everybody's way of coping is different, which is why, and I think somebody mentioned additional services, which is why we have disaster spiritual care. For some people, that is very important. For other people, it's not. Disaster mental health. For some people, that's very important. For some cultures, that's not. So everybody talked about listening to understand what the needs are of those people affected by the disaster. And that's also the key, because that's where you'll find out how we can help them, along their journey to recovery. So excellent. Thank you. Some great answers. And no matter what we do, if we put the client first, their sheltering experience will help them, start to move forward. And that's what we all want. So, okay. So, sheltering still remains a little bit fluid due to our COVID environment. We're not out of it. I don't know if we'll ever be out of it. And our priority, Red Cross's priority, is the safety, the health, and the well-being of the workforce and clients. First and foremost is keeping volunteers healthy and safe, because if they aren't healthy and safe, there's nobody to take care of the clients. So number one priority. Then right along beside that is the clients. So COVID has changed the way we do things in Red Cross. It has not changed our mission. So sheltering has taken on a variety of different, looking very different over the past 2 years, from putting everybody in non-congregate shelters, which were hotels or dormitory rooms or some way where we could separate people, to now going back to congregate sheltering. And how do we, again, keep people safe? During last year in the Gulf Country wildfires, everything was congregate sheltering again. So very, very different way of doing things than what we had done before. Okay, let's go to the next one. So let's answer a few questions about COVID that people wonder what our stand is. You must wear a mask right now when working at a Red Cross facility or office or participating in delivering our services. So, and now again, since COVID is fluid, so these are the answers to things today. Next week, they may be different, but this is where we stand right now. All right. What are the latest vaccine requirements for working in a Red Cross office or on a DRO, which is a disaster relief operation? Right now, you must be fully vaccinated. The 2 doses, you must have them by February 15th. And Red Cross asks that we upload our vaccination card into what we call our volunteer connection so that they know that we are vaccinated. Now, there are things somebody can do with Red Cross if they aren't vaccinated, but it isn't dealing with the public. So they may do things such as, computer work or things that they can do from their home, but where they don't interact with other people. So we follow this very closely. Masks, again, are required, and we are not wearing the cloth masks. It is the KN95s and the N95s. The KN95s are easier for us to get than the N95s. But if you're out, and I know in the last 2 years ago here in our Bay Area and last year in Gulf Country, the smoke was horrible. And if you are outside, you need to be wearing an N95 mask. So again, either one depending on the situation you're in. And last summer, I was at our job headquarters in Sacramento, and we all had masks on. Everybody wore a mask all the time. So, except when you ate. And if you were smart, you went and ate either outside, but sometimes it was too hot or too smoky, or you waited for other people to eat. You weren't eating the same time everybody was eating, so your mask was off at different times. Okay, let's go to the next one. So how effective are the Red Cross safety protocols, particularly given light of all the disasters that we've been responding to? Are there any stats on that and any lessons learned? Well, the answer to that is percentages can give you a false sense of security, but the number of positives from our current disaster relief operations is low. But exposures have risen, which means that more people who have been exposed can't work in the shelter and have to stay off the job until they get tests results that are negative and know that they are safe to go back to work. So it definitely has an impact on our sheltering. One of our responders who was working in the State Operations Center in Kentucky was exposed. The whole office of the State Operations Center was exposed in Kentucky. And she had to isolate for 2 weeks in Kentucky in her hotel room. It was not a lot of fun. And you just have to be really careful. Now, because of that, that also limits sometimes the number of volunteers who can deploy. Because if you are immune compromised or have conditions that you really don't want to take the chance, that means you're not going to deploy. So once again, partnering with CERT to help us in times when we really need those shelter workers is so important. Okay, thanks, Margaret. All right, so lots of reasons why we open up shelters. We open them up locally for apartment fires, and last November and December, we had 2 large apartment fires, one in Pittsburgh and one in Brentwood. We actually didn't open a shelter. We did non-congregate sheltering, and wildfires are another reason. Tsunami, we had a shelter opened in Santa Cruz, and we were canteening at the Berkeley Marina. Flooding, earthquakes, mudslides, storm damage, mass casualty events. And a lot of people don't think about Red Cross being at a mass casualty event. But we are there, we're behind the scenes. Our government partners, often it's the district attorney or even the FBI who will ask us to open up a open up a site for family members to go to while they're waiting to hear about their loved ones. The Gilroy Garlic Festival, we actually had a shelter open because the exhibitors at the Garlic Festival, when all of that happened, were rushed out. They couldn't take their cars. They didn't have their purses. It was a crime scene. They couldn't get home. So we opened up a shelter, which is where they stayed until they were allowed to get their materials. So many different ways that we are involved. And again, as I say, most people don't understand the role that we play in mass casualty incidents. And that's because they're so devastating, we just take a backseat to everything, and we're just there to help. Difficult to work. So, I mean, those are family assistance centers that I was talking about. But you can go, it's okay to go to the next one, but we open up shelters in all kinds of different locations. But in each shelter, there are certain functional areas that the shelter must have. It needs to have a lobby or a reception, registration, and information area. Needs to have a sleeping area or dormitory, a dining area for meals, an area where we can conduct health services, disaster mental health, spiritual care, and casework. Need to make sure that we have the toilets and showers needed, and you never have enough of those, and sometimes they're very difficult to get. But each of those areas also has a group of Red Cross volunteers that work in those areas and somebody that supervises those areas. Somebody mentioned chain of command, and I just wanted to say something to that. I was so impressed with, I can't remember who it was who mentioned chain of command, because most people don't think about that. But that is one of the key ways that we bring order to a time of real chaos during a disaster. And it's also a way where we're not duplicating what each other is doing. So if something is going on and I need to share that information, I share that with my supervisor. If I don't have a supervisor, I share it with my shelter manager. And then that shelter manager in the chain of command goes to his manager or supervisor, which may be a mass care lead. It could be a sheltering lead, depending on the size of the disaster, because every disaster is different. It is different. But when there are many shelters that are open up, and I think at one point during Gold Country last summer, we had, I think, 18 shelters operating at one time. Some of them were small, some were large. But if you can imagine requests coming in for toilets or showers from many different shelters, to have somebody who's coordinating all of that is incredibly important. And so that information gets passed up. The leadership on a disaster can look at what are the trends, what's happening, and make decisions for the whole disaster operation. So it's that chain of command is very important. Because if somebody individually just goes out and gets something where it could have been done more easily or more cost effectively in a different way, it's really about using that donor dollar in the most effective way that we can.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Does the Red Cross follow the same ICS standards as all the other organizations? And how do they put that together when they initially respond to a situation?
We follow basically the same ICS structure. It's in concept of operations. We may call the position something different, but it's that same structure. And that structure is at our job headquarters, which mimics the structure at another DOC, Disaster Operations Center, or job headquarters.
So do
And
you
then-
have someone, a representative in the command center away from the scene that's
In the-
coordinating?
It depends on the disaster. We have somebody working with our government partner at the Emergency Operations Center. There may or may not be somebody at the incident command site. There may be, there may not. Again, it depends on the disaster. It depends where we are in the disaster, but we are at the Emergency Operations Center. So, and there is direct communication from what's going on there to our Red Cross job headquarters. So, and we are giving the Emergency Operations Center direct information also.
Who
So-
would the point person be in one of those sites? I mean, like if you walked into one, who would you ask for?
And could I interrupt? Dennis, can we handle this at the end if we
Oh,
have
yeah,
time? We're
okay.
kind of, if we could put the questions, everybody in the chat, just because I know we are really compressed for time. Thank you. So I'm going to, Dennis, capture any more other questions you have on ICS in the chat and we'll absolutely get to it. Thank you.
Absolutely, we'll get to it. And thank you, Margaret, for keeping me on track.
There's so much to know. So
I know.
Thank you.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go on to the next slide now.
Hang on. Okay.
Okay, so we talked about some of the functions that are needed in a shelter. So are all shelters laid out the same way? No, because the buildings we use are different. And I think that the one point that I really want to make here is that the more areas of a shelter that you use, the more areas there are to supervise. So that's why we have a dormitory sleeping arrangement, although there may be times when you may also use an additional room for sleeping arrangement for some reason. But again, the more places you have people, the more places you have to make sure you know what's going on. Again, it's about safety for everyone. Okay, so let's talk about animals. Everybody, it's the number one issue in a shelter. Nobody wants to be without their pet. I don't want to be without my dog. I'm not going to leave my dog behind. So if in many locations, again, we are guests in someone's location where we have a shelter, and we also need to abide by their requests on what we do with their property. So there are some locations that are fine with having animals there, other locations that are not. And I can tell you what the official stand of the Red Cross is, and I can tell you the reality of what I see happening in just about every disaster I'm at. So these are all pictures from real pictures 3 of those are from the fires last summer. And the other one is from 2 years ago. If you notice, some people have masks on, some don't. And you can tell a few of these dogs are service animals and some are not. So let's go to the next slide. So service animals must be admitted into a Red Cross shelter. And the Americans with Disabilities Act defines a service animal as any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. Now, examples of some of that work include guiding people who are blind, alerting people who are deaf, pulling a wheelchair, alerting and protecting a person who is having a seizure, reminding a person with mental illness to take prescribed medications, calming a person with post-traumatic stress disorder during an anxiety attack, and performing other duties also. The ADA, also American Disabilities Act, has a provision about miniature horses that have been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. And we have had miniature horses in a couple of our shelters, one back east and one out here that I know of. So let's go to the next one. So it's important to remember that service animals are working animals. They're not pets. And they are tasked with a service, and they've been trained to provide that directly to the person's related disability. And so they're not pets. We need to make sure that these animals are there to take care and work with their owners, and that other shelter members do not treat them like pets. Want to go up to them, want to pet them, call out their names, want to play with them. We often need to enlist parental support in educating their children that these animals aren't to be petted. The owners of these service animals are responsible for their animals, although Red Cross may assist with food and supplies when it's needed. But it is up to the individual person to take care of their animal. And again, we may provide portable kennels, arrange for veterinarian care if needed. So any way that we can be of assistance. So when you think about animals in shelters, just go back for one more moment. There are other people who want their animals with them that are pets. And there are people who will not come into a shelter if they can't have their pet with them. So we try to do everything we can to make sure pets are taken care of. So one of the first things we do when we're opening up a shelter is immediately request help from, it might be CART in Contra Costa, it might be CART, Sonoma, different Napa, it's CART, animal control. So we reach out through our government partners saying that we need assistance. There have been shelters that I have been in up in Lake County where they didn't have the assistance necessary. And sometimes it's in the very beginning. Once things get going, then animal resource groups will come in. But in the very beginning, it's the immediate help that's needed. And it's the immediate partnerships and relationships that need to be built ahead of time. So up in Lake County, we've had shelters where animal control there were 3 people in their department. That was it. So they may drop off crates and food and the things that we need. But you can't keep animals outside in a crate when it's over 100 degrees in the sun all day long. So one of the facilities we were at, The high school gymnasium was a shelter for people without animals. The middle school gymnasium, which was right on the same property, was a shelter for people with their animals. Everybody in that shelter had animals. It smelled like a menagerie, but everybody was incredibly happy and responsible taking care of their animals. Hurricane Harvey, I know, Beth, I think it was you were going to go there and didn't get there. In Hurricane Harvey at the convention center, one of the hallways we called the doggy dormitory, because all the crates were lined up there and all the pets were there, and people could come from the shelter, go see their pet, go take their pet out for a walk, whatever they, however they wanted to interact with their animal. But a couple things to keep in mind is that in a shelter, and when you think about client first, you need to think about what is the best for everyone in that shelter. There are people that are afraid of dogs. And so we need to balance out their fear with somebody who wants their pet there. A disaster is a stressful situation. People are stressed, animals are stressed. The nicest animal can also bite when they're stressed. And that has happened in our shelters too, when pets are allowed in the shelters. There are people who are allergic to animals. And so again, we have to weigh those needs with, the whole client population. And so, as I said, it's about really looking at what are those guardrails and how do we get to yes in filling the needs of people who want their pets with them, and for those who it's really detrimental to have animals in the same area that they're at. And there are many ways to do it. And I think I've seen it probably done in just about every possible way. CART is great. They will come and open up a pet shelter right next to our people shelter. And that's the ideal situation. So it's really about thinking through what can be done, and then also looking at where are you at in the disaster? Is it just happening right now, or are we 3 days out when people can come in and help? So I just want you to think of it that way. It's not that we don't want pets in there. It's just that, again, we're trying to weigh the needs of everybody in that shelter. Okay, and I know we had a few comments that we'll address afterwards, Margaret. Okay. All right, let's move to the next. All right, so when the 3 phases of opening up a shelter, and opening, operating, and closing. And the one thing I wanted to say here is that from the moment you open a shelter, you're getting ready to close it, because you don't know how long that shelter will be open for various reasons. One, the shelter is open, and then before you know it, all of a sudden they can go home. All right. Or the shelter is open and now you're looking at all the shelters, and all of a sudden now you're going to start to consolidate shelters because people are being allowed to go back to their homes, but that's not everybody. Certain areas are opening up. So from the moment it's open, you are getting ready to close that shelter. And you're never making a commitment longer than, a few days. So when you think about things, and you won't be ordering a contract for like waste disposal, but you never want to get into a 30-day contract on something when you don't know how long you're going to be open. And usually those are handled at the job headquarters. But just keep that in the back of your mind, because once you start opening, you just don't know. And various things also take place. You're in a school, and now the school needs their gym back, or the church needs their community center back. And they've been great, and you've been there for 3 weeks, and they had no idea it was going to be that long. And you want to keep them because you value them as a partner. And so, you know, you're really looking at how can you consolidate shelters at that point. So I just wanted to make share that information about the different phases in sheltering. Okay, so in some key points that I just want to make is that you can never have too much signage. Signage about where the shelter is located, signage about the rules in the shelter, signage about scheduling, and the importance, I can't stress the importance of schedules. When a shelter goes on for a while, there are people who have to go back to work, even though they're staying in a shelter. And so to have a schedule is very important for them, to know that they can get up and they can get breakfast at a certain time, or that when they come home, because their shift doesn't end until 7 o'clock, will they still be able to get something to eat? So all of these things are really important. And schedules bring back a sense of normalcy to their lives. And I think that's something that we often don't think of when we think about schedules, but it's really important. In their normal life, they have schedule. Kids go to school at a certain time, lunches at a certain time, dinners at a certain time, cleanup is at a certain time. Sometimes you have to make a schedule for people using the shower because you only have so many showers. So all of those kinds of things are really important to think about when you're in a shelter. And I'll tell you that one of the most important things when you're trying to find a shelter is to make sure there's signage out there so people can find it when they're coming there for the first time. Okay, next one. All right, did we have one other, did I miss, were there 2 key points? Maybe there's only one. Okay. So dormitories. So because of COVID, we now allow more social distance between cots. And there's now 6 feet all the way around cots. Cots are arranged head to toe, again, providing the most distance. So it's really more than 6 feet between one head and another head. And it's really important when you think about the dormitory that you think about it as, I liken it to like designing a little town, you know, and elderly people go in this area because it's close to the restroom. Families go in this area. Single men go over here, single women go over here. So it's, as I say, it's kind of like designing a little town. And when you think about it, you know, we pretty much know the makeup of our communities here in Contra Costa County. So you can kind of get an idea, even before people start showing up, what you might need. And then you also think about who are the people who are coming to your shelter. If you have resources to go somewhere else, you're not going to go to a shelter. If you have insurance that will pay for a hotel, you're not going to go to a shelter. If you have family members or friends that you can stay with, you're not going to go to a shelter. So the people who are coming to the shelter are people who have no other options but to come. And it's a good, I mean, thank goodness they have this option. But so it's really important that we take that into consideration and that we understand that they may have more needs than someone else, and find out what those needs are so we can fill them. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Here's the other more key points to remember. So lately, I'd say this trend has just been increasing over the years, that there are more and more people staying outside of our shelters. That doesn't mean there aren't people inside, but there are more and more people outside for various reasons. They want their pets to be able to roam around. They want They want to be able to have a beer, or they want to be able to partake in, whatever. Or they just don't want to be confined inside of a shelter. So those people that are outside in our shelters, we ask them to register as shelter clients. They're just outside clients. And it's important then that we include them in our shelter count. Every night we do a midnight shelter count. And to know the number of people inside and the number of people outside is very important for certain reasons. People outside are entitled to come in and have our meals. They're entitled to all of our services, using our showers, the restrooms. But particularly when you think about meals, if you have 200 people outside of your shelter and you haven't planned for feeding them, I don't know what you're going to do at mealtime when you're short 200 and some meals. So it's really important to understand that that count needs to be a part of the numbers that you turn in. And the Office of Emergency Services always wants that count also, the inside count and the outside count. All right, and I can't stress the importance of hand sanitizing stations everywhere, inside, outside. Every time there should be one at the entrance to the shelter, and every time somebody comes in, you want them to use the hand sanitizing station. Some of them have water where you can wash your hands. It just depends on the station. You want them by the food so that people are sanitizing their hands before they come for the food. So if you don't have enough, tell your supervisor or your manager that you need more and make sure that they order them. Okay. All right, next slide. So we talked about in our earliest conversation, we talked about how do we help the shelter residents move on their road to recovery. So a couple years ago, we started working with shelter resident transition teams, SRTs. And the SRT teams, they take a look at identifying what are the roadblocks that people are having to moving on, and what are the solutions or the resources, the partners that are out there that can help our shelter clients begin their journey towards recovery. And remember, these are the people that are the most needy that are in the shelters. So there are often many roadblocks. And some are also, they're still in shock and denial. Okay, let's go to the next one. So the shelter resident transition team begins working with clients when they arrive or as soon as we bring them in. And we can't, as far as I'm concerned, we can never bring them in soon enough. So they go around and, they actually do an assessment of people in the shelter. And that assessment, they use the CMIST framework, and it's really about an approach integrating access and functional needs of these individuals. And it's about communicating, maintaining health, independence, support, and safety, and transportation. All those things that are necessary for one of our shelter clients to move on. So ideally, they do the assessment, then they turn, our client caseworkers come in then to work with our clients. And hopefully then the client is able to transition from the shelter and be on their way towards their recovery process. Okay, so some of the common barriers that we see all the time are, again, social vulnerability and lack of affordable housing. When the town has burned down, where are they going to go? They can't afford to go somewhere else. Even an apartment fire, they were paying a certain rent and now they're supposed to go and get another apartment somewhere else because the landlord does not have another place for them to be. And now they're going to have to come up with a first, a last, a security. It is very difficult for many people. And again, as I say, their home is destroyed. There's nowhere to go. Lack of transportation is an issue. Clients who were pre-disaster homeless, we need to bring in resources to help figure out where they can go next, because they've been safe and secure at the shelter, but the shelter is not going to stay open forever. There are people with mental health and health-related disasters who may have had a caregiver where they were living before the disaster happened, but now they don't have a place to go back to, and they don't have the caregiver anymore, and they don't have any family members. So what's going to happen with that individual? So together with our caseworkers and our health services and our government partners, we work at figuring out what's the next best step for that person. Some people just don't have the information, and some people have a lack of childcare so that they can actually make the plans to leave and move on. So a host of different barriers that we need to take a look at. And if we don't uncover and help them through those barriers, they become stuck, and there's no way that they are ready to move on. So it's a really important group that is working now in the Red Cross. Okay, the next one. So as a shelter worker, some of the very important tasks that you have are just being in the shelter and being around the shelter clients, listening to the shelter clients, talking with them, checking in with them, seeing what's going on. Have they made any progress? And when you hear some of their concerns, to share those concerns with your shelter supervisor so that they can get somebody in here to help work on those concerns. And if you observe a client who's in distress or exhibiting, odd behavior, again, report it to your shelter supervisor, because then they can call in the individual disaster care team to work with those people. Or it may be spiritual care, depending on what are the needs of that client. So in the information that we gave you was the participant guide. And in the participant guide, there is a checklist of all the tasks that you need to do in the various phases, the opening, operating, and closing phases of the disaster. So we're not going to go through those. You have them there. If you are going to work in a shelter, it's something you want to bring with you. If you get a chance to print it out or have it online, or save it on your phone or on your iPad or wherever you can, bring it with you. It will help you to understand what you should be doing, and know that what you should be doing will change. It's about flexibility in a disaster. You may be asked to do registration, but now all of a sudden you're setting up cots because that's what's needed at that moment. So being flexible as a shelter worker is very important. And also being very upfront and asking for a job induction. What is it? What are their expectations? What is it that you are supposed to be doing? What are you responsible for? Who do you report to? Making sure you have the contact information of that person is very important. And there are documents that come out in a disaster. There's an incident action plan and a sit rep that are produced daily. And in that incident action plan, if you were assigned to a disaster, you automatically get it. It's emailed to you every night. It has a list of everybody in leadership who's assigned to that disaster. So if you needed to speak to somebody, you would know who you could get a hold of. And it's the current people that are assigned. And the CERT report gives you a broader idea of what's going on in that disaster. Because when you're in your shelter, all you see is what's going on in your shelter. And then there are morning and evening calls. And I know many shelters at the 7 a.m. briefing, the shelter manager will put their computer on and anybody can come over and listen to that shelter briefing. And then there's one at 6 at night also. And those times can vary depending on the disaster. But those briefings will really let you know what's going on. And I'll tell you, they're really critical to understand what's happening in the broader picture, what all the different areas like logistics is doing, what mass care is doing, what shelters may be consolidated. They'll talk about all of that on those calls. So they're really helpful. Okay, next one. How are we doing on time? Okay. All right. Just a couple things I want to mention about registration. And I loved it when I think it was, it might have been Judy who said, registration is the first impression someone who's been affected by a disaster gets of Red Cross. And it's true. And I always remember you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And it's no different in a shelter also. So that area where you come into, whether it's a reception area or right into registration, or it's a screening area, because in this COVID day and age, we screen people before they come in, asking them the CDC COVID questions, might be taking their temperature, and making sure that they have their mask on when they come in. That's where you make somebody feel at home and comfortable. So just a couple things to remember. I'm just going to say just a few things. Get their cell phone number, because if you need to get a hold of them for whatever reason, it's so much easier if you have their cell phone number. Now, they are filling out a client registration form, but you want to make sure that that's there. And there are people who don't have cell phones, and so you want to figure out how would you communicate with them if you need to. That's the time when you talk about food allergies and dietary needs, and not everybody will tell you that then. You may see somebody in the shelter who isn't eating, and you wonder, well, why aren't they eating? And that's the time when you go over, and talk to them. And you may find out that they have, for whatever reason, specific dietary considerations that we don't know about. And if we knew about, we would make sure that those dietary, that we met their dietary needs. So sometimes it may take us a day to get that all arranged, but we're going to make sure they get what they need. And again, making sure that the outdoor clients understand that they have access to all the services with Red Cross. And you see Red Cross out in those parking lots all the time, working with people out there. But we do want them to register so that we know who's out there and what they need. Okay, go to the next one. Client confidentiality is so important. If you think about the people who come to our shelters, many are undocumented immigrants who are afraid to come to our shelters. They're afraid that we're going to give their information. And so they don't trust us. So it's really important for them to understand that we will not share their information with anyone unless they have given us permission to do so. And there is a question on the registration form where we ask if they will allow us to share information. No pressure to say yes or no, whatever they want. And it's also important that when you're working with them with registration, that not only for safety reasons do you have space in between the tables where you're working, but also for client privacy, so that other people aren't listening to the conversations that you're having with the people that you're working with. When those forms are filled out, they aren't left out on a table, they're put away. And again, we don't share that information. There are times that we will work with our government partners. An example of that was during the campfire. I was at the State Operations Center working, and there were many, many, many missing people during the campfire. And of course, our government partners always want us to give them our shelter lists. Well, we don't do that. But again, in working what is in the best interest of our clients and their families, we would work with our government partners to tell us who's missing, and we'll tell you that they're not missing. But that doesn't mean that we're telling you what shelter they're in, but we're telling you they're not missing so that they can mark them off their list. And then family members know that too. We also have something called Safe and Well. It just went through revision, and Safe and Well is a computer program where we'll have a computer set up in our shelter, and shelter residents can go on there and log in and register that they are safe. So anybody from the outside can do a search looking for a family member. And if they have chosen to respond, they can find out that they are safe. They can also say where they're at or not. They can just put in, I'm safe. So again, it depends on the situation that individual people find themselves in. Many will put in, I'm safe and I am in such and such a shelter. But again, it's up to the individual client. So we take that very seriously about protecting client privacy and individuality and confidentiality, to the point where if somebody comes in asking for somebody, we don't say whether they're there or not. What we'll often do is say, you know, I'm happy if you'd like to leave a note, I'll post it on our message board. And if somebody is here that can respond to that, they will. But that's the best that I can do. So, and then you'll see that shelter clients will look at that message board. It's again, another way to get information to people who are in the shelter for all different kinds of things. It might be a program that's being offered, or you'll put a flyer up there. And so people will constantly look at that board. Okay, the next one. All right, so we're just going to keep going. We're coming into the home stretch, you guys. All right, so let's talk for a moment about clients with access and functional needs. There are roughly 1 in 5 people who identify themselves as living with some type of disability. So if you think about 1 in 5, that's a huge number of people in your shelter who will have some kind of access and functional needs or a disability. And disabilities do not discriminate against anybody. So we have a commitment to take care of our clients with access and functional needs so they can operate as independently as possible in the shelter. So if we go to the next one. And if you click one more time, it always surprises me what the definition is of access and functional needs. People who don't speak English are classified as AFN, or they have limited proficiency in English. Older adults, there are some children. I mean, people who are institutionalized, living in institutionalized settings, who may have a cognitive limitation, have access and functional needs. That doesn't mean that they cannot live independently. Some can, some cannot, but it's up for us to help understand what their needs are and get to yes to help them get what they need to live as independently as they can. Also, pregnant women are classified as AFN. So it's, as I say, that's people who are dependent on public transit. So, I mean, when you think about that, it's a huge number of people. So if you go to the next one, our commitment is to deliver quality services to everyone in the shelter. And so equal access to services and support for all of them. Now, remember, equal and equitable. So it's really important to understand what it is, not to assume that we know what somebody needs. So if you click one more time, listening to our clients and letting their words guide what we do, rather than we assuming that we know what the actions are that they need. So if you go to the next one. So it's about asking, listening, and then learning from them. If you click one more time. Again, asking, listening, and learning. And I'll just give you an example. So somebody comes into your shelter and they had a knee replacement. So how, again, asking, how can we help you? What do you need so that you're able to get around? Then listening to what they have to say. I mean, do they need a walker? Do they need a wheelchair? Do they not need anything? And then learning, more from them about what this disability or access and functional need is really all about. It's for me, it's always humbling to listen and learn and see then, what can we do to help them be independent? So I think it's really important to understand that. And we often will have FAST. I always forget the functional assessment, functional assessment specialty team or something like that. They're a part of the county. They come through the county. We request that they come into our shelters, or sometimes they just come in, and they help us determine what some of those needs are. And then they'll also help us get some of the equipment that might be needed to fill some of those needs. So they're a great resource for us. Okay, next one. Okay, so let's totally switch gears away from the shelter and talk for a moment about temporary evacuation points. Okay, so next one. So a temporary evacuation point is a safe gathering area for people that are impacted by an evacuation. They're ideally managed by the county or city, and they're supported by the Red Cross. They're usually outdoors. It's a pre-identified site, and it's can often be a large parking lot or an open field. And not this wildfire season, but the last wildfire season before it started, we had a long conversation with Confire about identifying sites that could be used for large wildfire evacuations. Because when something happens, they need to get people out quickly. And sometimes it may be law enforcement who's handling the evacuation and determining where that site may be, or it can also be fire. And sometimes they pick great locations. Sometimes they don't pick the best locations, but they're picking the best of what they can do at that moment. And so we will show up at that site working with our government partners to set it up and get it ready. So, okay, go to the next one. So it's a great place for people to go to wait and see what's going to happen. And for us too. It's a location where we can start to make plans for opening up a shelter. We can open up a shelter pretty quickly, but it still takes time. We have to determine the location. We have to go get access to the location. We have to do an inspection of that location, all before we open it up. We have to get volunteers to come and set it up and to work it. So we're doing all of that behind the scenes. So this is a place where people can go, they can get information, they can come and get some snacks, water, snacks, and have a safe place to stay while they find out what's happening. Okay, the next one. So during COVID, the considerations were that this is safer than bringing people indoors into a congregate evacuation center. Definitely true. People stay in their vehicles, and their vehicles serve to isolate them into small groups. We have them maintain social distancing. If you ever had one of your vaccines at one of the drive-through sites, I had mine in San Ramon, and it was, in this big office parking lot, and they had you come in, you parked not next to another car, there was spaces between cars, they came up to you, got your information, you rolled your window back up, then they came back around later and gave you your vaccination. Same principle. So we bring in some volunteers, again, working with our government partners, following CDC safety protocol, so that, again, keeping everybody safe, and also finding out what the health history is of people in those cars. Okay, next one. So how's the TEP activated? Well, it's usually activated, as I said, by one of our government partners, law, fire. And it's usually not the moment that people are evacuated. Usually they're just interested in getting people out, and then they think of where they want them to go. Sometimes it's quicker, but it's not always as they issue the evacuation. So some of the support we need is they'll generally choose the site location, and we're told what it is. We need them to help us staff the site. We need them to get the word out to the community where the site is. And that word may come out through a community warning system. It may come out through Nixle alert. You may see it in a text message or on social media or television station, all different ways. Same way we get the word out on where the shelters are. If it's a location that's a parking lot, we might need mobile toilets or hand washing stations. And again, we may need security. And if it goes into the evening and there isn't lighting, we may need lighting. During the Deer Zone fires, they had designated a TEP in Clayton at the Safeway parking lot. Well, at the Safeway parking lot at 9 o'clock, the lights go out and there's no access to bathrooms. So that really wasn't going to work. So the city of Concord was wonderful in getting us another location, which ended up being at the Clayton Library, where we had people come and stay in their cars until actually they were there all night until the next morning, when we could get them hotel rooms to go into. So it's a great, it serves such an important purpose doing this, much better than an evacuation site. So what Red Cross will do, they'll come in, we'll do the screening and the registration, unless we have public health there helping us doing the screening, doesn't always happen. We will make sure the clients get to whatever the sheltering option is that's decided. We'll supply snacks and water, provide disaster information, and assist with, disaster relief items. They may need blankets. If it's the evening and it's chilly, they're not going to have their car running all night. We'll make sure that they have blankets. So, so this is just, yeah, go ahead, Margaret. Thank you. So this is a picture of a site in LA where they were opening up a TEP. Go on to the next one. So when you lay out a TEP, there's a drive-through area with somebody greeting people, cones. And I mean, these are things that you guys, as you guys direct traffic for different things, this is what this is nothing new for you guys. So drive-through greeting area, we make sure people park. Sometimes there are numbers, if we're that organized, that we can put in the windows. And so again, there are also people that walk up during a disaster. And so we have to have an area where they can come to and be safe. So go to the next one, Margaret. Thank you. People that are needed at the TEP. And as you notice, some of these people are from Home Depot. So event-based volunteers there helping out. You need a site coordinator, you need some greeters, you need some people in the parking lot, you need some people handling registration, security, and safety. And again, all team members are screened before they start volunteering. Let's just skip this one and go to the next one. This is the site coordinator, the things that they need to be responsible for. And again, the greeter, making sure that the person comes in, gives them information, tells them where to go, and then make sure that we have all the information that we need. Okay, then the next one. So they're given an arrival packet. There's a letter that we have that we will have printed up or copied off. Make sure that they have masks, a pen to use, and there's a form that we ask them to fill out. And that's, I believe, the next slide. Oh, well, we'll get to the next one in a minute. So we direct them to where we want them to go park. Again, making sure that there's space in between cars. We ask them to stay in their cars unless they need to use a restroom or something like that. Okay, next one. And this diagram just, it reminds me of when I went for the vaccination, where they have you come in, they have you park, they have you go out. It's just easily identified, and except you may stay there much longer at a TEP than you do for your vaccination. Okay, next one. So it's important when they come in that we get their phone number, because we can interview them by calling their cell phone and get the information from them that we need. And we're getting the information in case we're opening up a shelter, or we may be putting them in a hotel, but it's most likely a shelter. And so if we can't get it by phone, then we do go over to the car and get it. Okay, next one. This is what the client registration form looks like. It's not a lot to it. Okay, next one. And then again, setting up an area for walking clients where they're socially distanced and they're out of the sun and safe. We do offer snacks and water. We can bring it around to them. As you see, that's what we're doing here in this picture. Very seldom do we serve meals, so it's just snacks and water. And again, depending on the disaster. So for the client, they enter the TEP, they get information, they are assigned a place to park, they wait for us to reach out to them. We do the interview, determine what they need, and all these things make, if we end up opening a shelter, they can go right into the shelter. And we already have this information and they can already start to get settled. Okay, next. So what happens when somebody leaves a TEP? Either the evacuation is lifted and the client goes home, or we're opening up a shelter and the client goes to the shelter, or the client finds another place to go. But in all cases, their needs have been met. So important things are screening, social distancing, masks being worn, and keeping clients in their cars. And so those are the ground rules, and it's worked really successfully in the last 2 years. Okay, important to realize that you need to be flexible when you're doing a TEP. Again, it's a case-by-case scenario. They're temporary, minimal services, minimal staff, and it's just aimed at keeping everybody safe with basic services. Okay, next. So that gives you a quick rundown of TEPs. All right. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is that we've done over the years, we've done quite a bit of training with CERT, shelter training, in-face training, different training. We had an advanced training CERT program with La Marinda many years ago. So different things. And one of the ways we thought we might be able to make it easier in working together is developing a Red Cross CERT partnership, where you would sign up on Red Cross. It's a specific CERT portal. So you're not bombarded with all kinds of Red Cross stuff, but it's being a Red Cross CERT partner. And the really nice thing about it is that if you decide that that is something you'd like to do, you have access to all of our online training. So if you want to learn more about logistics, or you want to learn more about disaster mental health, there's all kinds of classes on there. Facilitative leadership. I mean, there's just a ton of classes that you have access to take. So those are there. If you should want to deploy, if you like the experience of actually going out and working a disaster, this will qualify you to go work in a shelter in a disaster. And if there's a disaster happening in our volunteer connection, there's an area where you can put in your availability, and you can do that, or you don't have to. So there's many advantages to doing this. The other advantage is if something happens here, you can immediately go and help. We can do a call out and see if you're available to go help. So Margaret's going to distribute this. She'll send it out to all of you. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to walk you through it, or anything that way. So go to the next one. So Margaret, I'm going to turn it over to you for a moment to start to wrap this up.
Okay, thanks, Brianna. I wanted to just most importantly say thank you very much to Brianna for her time today, and to the American Red Cross. I know that Walnut Creek CERT and Martinez CERT and Concord CERT are very grateful for this additional training opportunity. And I want to thank everybody who's participated in this session. And we want to make sure that you know that we will get these materials to you. We'll get the recordings done in the next couple of weeks, converted to YouTube, and we will get all the questions answered for you. I can't speak for Concord or Martinez. If you're Walnut Creek Cert, we're going to send you a merit.com certificate to commemorate this completion of this training. We're beginning to use merits.com as a way to capture very specific training, such as missing persons drill completion, traffic management, this course, and we'll also be tracking if you sign up as a CERT registered American Red Cross registrant. So just, keep in mind that we will keep track of your training, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So Brianna, I'm gonna stop sharing. We are kind of at 1 minute 2, so I don't know if there's time to, so let's just handle it with the, after you've done 2 of these today. We will send everybody the accumulated questions from both sessions, because I think both sessions had really interesting but very different questions. So.
And remember that there will be a third piece, hopefully sometime in the spring, where we can meet outside and do stations of setting up cots, doing registration, give you some real hands-on experience, COVID willing. So we'll be working with Margaret and Milagros and Trish to set that up.
Great. All
And
right.
again, thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, willing to give us this time on your Saturday, and for all that you do. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thank
rest of
you.
your Saturday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both very much.
Okay, bye-bye.